Hello everyone, this is Leslie Pelch at the Vermont Center for Geographic Information. I want to welcome you to our webinar today, which is a repeat of a previously offered webinar, hopefully with no technical issues at the end. And also, I think I'm going to try to move through this one a little bit quicker to make sure that we have time to get to everything. I got a little feedback from the last one that there was too much explaining of GIS and assuming that the audience was all complete newcomers. So I'm going to try to be just a little bit less sensitive to the newcomers this time. So if you're someone that needs a little bit more explaining, feel free to ask questions, but otherwise I'm going to try to zoom through stuff a bit. So our topic today is Quantum GIS Data Acquisition and Transformation, and we're going to start with the acquisition part, which as you can see, we're also going to start at the VCGI webpage, because this is one of the first places that you can go to acquire GIS data. So let's quickly go through, heading over to the Data and Imagery page, or section really, of our website. And the first thing I want to point out is that there are a number of different ways to search for data at our website. Often the first place people go, because it's got something filled in already, is this theme search. These are basically categories of data. You can click on any of the categories, click on the Go button, and you will see a search results table that gives you the names of the data layers, a description, the actual data manager. Notice that most of these are not VCGI. Actually, in this particular category, a lot of them are just because they're boundaries. There's also this button to More Info, which gives you a little bit of information about the data and also a link to the full metadata, which is where you would go to answer many of the questions you might have about the data. All right, so that's through the More Info button. And if you looked at this and you said, yep, that's the data layer I want, you would simply click on the icon under the word download. You'd save it somewhere on your computer. Notice that it's a zip file, which means you have to unzip or extract it once you've saved it onto your computer. After you've done that, it's available for use in your GIS program. If we go back to the Search Tools page, which is the main data page, we also have a keyword search. So if we were to search for something specific like airports, we might get a smaller search results table, obviously same format, same More Info button, and same download option. If we go over to this button on the left, just under Search Tools that says Theme Index, you'll see it takes those themes and breaks them down a bit more. So if you're not sure what theme the data you're interested in would be within, or if you just want to get a sense of what sort of data we have, this is a good place to go to just look around a bit. Let me see if I can pick an example of some data that gives you a few more options, or a slightly different situation when you click on download. So you can see we've got lots of different data layers related or that are derivatives of really the E911 data. So if we look at the eSite data, and if we were to click on, I thought the eSite data was, sorry, I was going to pick something that is not all one file. What was I gonna? DEMs, about that. Yeah, okay, sorry about that. So here's some digital elevation data. And this time, when I clicked on the download button, rather than simply allowing me to download one file for the whole state, this takes me to a page with lots and lots of different zip files. And basically, because this data is pretty dense, it's pretty big. We've broken the data up into tiles, into chunks of data, and you can see that it's somewhat cryptically named. But up at the top of any of these lists of especially cryptically named tiles or pieces of data, pieces of the state, you will see an index, a couple of different options for index. Actually, one is a PDF index map, so if I click on that, I'll actually see a map, and I just have to zoom in a whole lot in order to start to see what those tiles are named so I can figure out which ones I want for my area of interest. And then I can just go back, pick that one, and go ahead and download it. Once you click on this, you just get the normal download options. I just want to check in. Somebody had some technical difficulties. Let me just see if... Okay, let's move on to, all right, so that's to download most of our data. Generally it's vector data, although there are a few exceptions to that. There's a little bit of raster data in there as well. Let's move on to the imagery data, because that's the other very popular set of data that's in a slightly different place. You access it a little bit differently. So you can see that just below theme index is the word imagery, and if you click on that, it also shows you some subdirectories within there. The main page will show you a list of data available for download, a few different categories of data. There are also links to information about if you prefer to purchase the imagery data on a drive. And the main reasons for doing that would be, as you'll see, you have to download individual image by individual image in our download section. So if that's a little too tedious, if you know you want the whole state or a big chunk of the state, it might just be efficient to purchase it on the drive. And to be honest, it's not very expensive. The most expensive product we have is $185, and that's for all of the imagery, all ages, all formats, and all parts of the state. So we don't give you a lot of options for purchasing, but they are at least simple. And let me just quickly go to the products page to show you that. So here are what we call our media bundles. So all imagery available, you can click on Add to Cart, and you'll go to PayPal, and it will give you a $185 product to purchase. You can also get all the LiDAR that we have available for $185. And then there's a few other options where we break out a couple different kinds of data. Not a lot of different options, though. If, on the other hand, you do want to download the data, simply click on one of these options. You get that same search results table. And when you're ready to download, you will get this, once again, the cryptic listing of tiles of images. And again, the index up at the top that will help you to pick which images you want. I forgot to point out that the other format for the index is actually a zipped shapefile. So if you download this zipped shapefile, you can unzip it or extract it, bring it into your project, and then use that as your guide to which tiles. If you just turn on the labels on that layer, you'll be able to pick which tiles you need for any particular area of interest. You can see there are also some links to more information about the imagery program. And in particular, I'll just point out, if you're interested in what the plan is for what's being collected when, you can go to the acquisition plan page and click on the link to this map. That just shows you that we've already collected 2011, 2012, 2013 is going to become available very soon. It was collected last spring. 2014 will be collected next spring, and 2015, the southern part of the state will be collected, and that will finish up the third vintage of digital orthos. And these the newest vintage of orthos are available as color, black and white, and color infrared for the areas that have been collected so far. Okay, the final thing, sort of format of data that you can get from us, I'm actually not going to talk about quite yet. I'll just point out that it's here, just below the imagery link, web services. We're actually going to come back to this after we open up QGIS. Let's see. All right. So that's all we're going to talk about at our website. And as I said, we're going to open up QGIS in just a second, but first I'm going to go through one more data acquisition option, and that is getting data from a different source. Oh, something I forgot to point out. If you get data from VCGI, all of the data that you download or get on a drive from us will be in Vermont State Plane meters NAD 83. There's one exception to that, which is one of the imagery products. This Vermont Canadian border area is the only data that we distribute that's not Vermont State Plane. That's actually in UTM. Other than that, it's all Vermont State Plane. What if you were to get data from a different state, like New Hampshire? And when we open up QGIS, you'll see that it's relatively easy to deal with the fact that data that you might get from other sources is going to be, generally speaking, in a different coordinate system than data from Vermont. So we'll go to Granite. I'm going to look for town boundary data. No, doing it wrong, of course. One would think that I could remember how I did this, since I just did it a few weeks ago. There we go. You'll notice the keyword searches can be tricky. You put an S on the end and it doesn't work. So this is what I was looking for: New Hampshire political boundaries at a 1 to 24,000 scale. So Granite is a somewhat similar organization to VCGI, serving up data in Vermont. You'll notice that they offer both shape and KMZ, which is the Google Earth format, but I want shapefile. I want to go ahead and download that. Now I actually have this data already on my computer, but you can see that it's essentially the same set of steps at this point. It's a zip file, it's a shapefile, and the only thing I need to keep in mind is the fact that it is going to be in New Hampshire State Plane, not Vermont State Plane. Okay, so let's close this up and open up Quantum. This takes a second. Oh, and I do apologize. I have yet to have a chance to download the newest version of Quantum. I'll briefly comment. Did I actually double click? On what Quantum is. Quantum is a free and open source software program. Free means free. Open source refers to the fact that anybody can get access to the actual source code of the software, and if you become a part of the community that actually works on QGIS, you can contribute back improvements and plugins and all different sorts of aspects of the software. It's kind of an open community of people, although it's not the Wild West. It is regulated to a certain extent, self-regulated. So you can see that it looks a lot like any other GIS software program, and we use it pretty much the same way we do any other. We start adding data. I want to point something out, which is that when I do trainings on how to use QGIS, I have learned over the years that it's important to, at the very beginning, set the project properties and set the coordinate reference system. Unlike ArcGIS, QGIS does not automatically set the project to the coordinate system of whatever the first data layer brought in is. It doesn't really set the project coordinate system unless you set it on purpose. And in order to do that, you would click Enable on the fly, pick your coordinate system. I'm pointing this out right now because I'm actually not going to do this, because I want us to see what happens when we don't do this. So I'm going to start out by adding in some Vermont town boundary data. Do I want to do it from here? Sure, why not? Okay, town boundaries, there's Vermont. Now I'm going to add in that New Hampshire data. which I happen to have right here. And I have to admit, I can never remember which one is the polygon, so we'll try this one. I have a feeling it's the other one. So the first thing we notice is that we're not seeing it. There it is. So we can immediately see that we have an issue here, which is that our data is not lining up properly. It's obviously not scaled properly. The nice thing about this is that because both sets of data actually do have projection files or .prj files that indicate the coordinate system and projection of each of them, this is an easily remedied issue. So we go back to our project properties. We go in to set the coordinate reference system. I'm going to set it to Vermont. You can see that there's a recently used, if I was using QGIS for the first time, this would be unpopulated, but I would be able to search in a number of different ways. I could just type in Vermont, and you can see that I get some options down here, and I would choose this one. You'll also notice there's a little code associated with the Vermont state plane coordinate system 32145. So I could also use that code up here, and that would also narrow it right down. And then I can just apply that, and everything cozies up lovely. So now my project has been set to Vermont State Plane, and the New Hampshire data has simply been transformed mathematically to match that. All right, so all we've done so far is get some data, download it to my computer, bring it into one project, 2 different coordinate systems, make them line up. We've done a few different acquisition and transformation activities so far. The next thing I want to do is bring in some different types of data. So far, these are just shape files, which are easy enough to work with. Another type of data that we might have access to and might want to bring in is CSV data, text data, in like a spreadsheet or a text file. So I have up at the top here, actually I'll just point out that these are all the different ways that you can add data. Once you notice that, it's pretty straightforward. They have the little plus signs on them. There's actually a couple of things here that may not be there by default when you first install and turn on QGIS. So I'll point out where I got them from. This one that's called Add Delimited Text Layer is a plugin, and it is a plugin that comes with the software. Excuse me, comes with the software. It's just not automatically turned on. Excuse me. So what we would do is click on Manage Plugins. And there's not that many here, so you can just scroll through them. You can see that right up at the top is Add Delimited Text Layer. All you have to just do the check in the box, X in the box. The other one that I have turned on, I'll just point out, is GPS Tools. And we're going to look at that one in a minute. So Add Delimited Text Layer. I happen to have this little, I'm not sure if it's a CSV file or a spreadsheet actually. Yeah, comma separated. So this is a CSV file that I happen to have gotten. It was actually downloaded originally from a USGS website. And it has the lat-long coordinates of dams in New Hampshire, mostly in New Hampshire as it turns out. The important thing to know about bringing in CSV data in this way, a delimited text file, is that you either need to know how it's delimited or you need to kind of try out a few different things to figure this out. I'll just point out that if I don't have tab checked, if I have any of these other options checked but not tab, and I can look at my sample text down here to make a judgment about whether this seems right, and initially I'm going to say that doesn't look right. You know, none of these options look right. But as soon as I turn that tab on, it doesn't matter whether any of the others are checked or not. As soon as I have that tab on, it looks right. So if this was actually comma separated as opposed to tab, or comma delimited rather than tab delimited, that would be the one I would have to check in order to make this look right. So this is just a nice little visual check. If you don't know how it's delimited, or if you're not sure you have everything set right, you can just look down here. We can also see the PLAT dec, which means it's in decimal degrees, and p-lon dec. And we need to make sure that these fields are set correctly. So we've got the longitude and the latitude. This is indeed correct. So longitude goes in the east-west direction, and the latitude goes in the north-south direction, which would be the Y field. So, but that's another one that you want to make sure to have that set properly. Otherwise, you're not going to end up in the right places. So now we're pretty much all set. We just click OK. So keep in mind that this is just a text file, and it wants to make sure that it knows what coordinate system these points are, or these coordinates rather, are in. Now it's not a state plane system, but this does help you to realize that you could have coordinates that are in any system as long as you know what they are. This one happens to be WGS 84, which is what lat long is called. So we say OK, and voila. Now if I were to zoom to layer extent on this layer, you'll notice that we do have some outliers right down in the right corner here. So when this data was originally created, there obviously were some mistakes, which we're not going to worry about right now. But if you're ever working with data and zoom to layer extent and you get a crazy result like that, just keep in mind it can just be weird data in there. Paul asks a question, then I'll pause and answer now since I'm sort of right in the middle of this. Can a QGIS project be set to NAD 83 feet rather than meters? The more specific question that I'm going to answer is whether you can set it to Vermont state plane meters rather than feet, feet rather than meters, which you cannot, as it turns out. You can set it to New Hampshire state plane feet. I assume that's because someone at some point made the judgment that Vermont doesn't use state plane feet, and so they didn't bother to include it as one of the options. I'll just show you. If we go in here, so like I did before, if I search on Vermont, you'll see that we have Vermont NAD 27, NAD 83, we have HARN, and we have NSRS. But none of these are feet, and the way that you can check that is right here. This is what the actual PRJ file says, by the way. And it says units equal M. Oh, I am wrong. NAD 27 is in feet. Okay. So no, you can't do NAD 83 feet, but the NAD 27 is actually in feet. If we were to do New Hampshire, interestingly, you'll see that New Hampshire has both meters, units equal meters, and units equals feet. Oops, where are they? There they are. Units equals US feet. So I have noticed before that you cannot set it to Vermont state plane feet. I haven't actually looked at whether you can do a custom setting. You probably can, but I haven't looked into that yet. All right, so we've got our dam data in there. We've got our boundary data. The other thing I wanted to show you is that you can bring in GPX data. Well, first I'm not going to go through a full demonstration of this because this is actually where my technical problem happened last time, and I recreated it right before I turned on the webinar today. I seem to have a limited number of USB ports, or at least on the accessible side of my computer, and my headphones are plugged into one, so I'm just going to fake this. So you can see that GPS Tools is right down here. And as I pointed out before, that's a plug-in that you have to turn on. It does come with the software, but you have to actually go into the plug-in manager and turn it on to make it show up on your toolbar. So there are a few different things you can do in here. You can load a GPX file. So I can just, look. So here's a GPX that I created for another webinar, actually. And this is not great color option, but let me just improve this a little bit. And then zoom in on this a little. No, it's still a little hard to see. So this is just a GPS track that I created right here in Waterbury. So there's some GPX data that was I downloaded from my GPS, saved on my computer, and I just brought it in using that GPS tools. This is if you want to import a different type of file and output it as a GPX file. So this might be the way to create a file that you could actually upload to your GPS unit. And then the actual process to upload is done in this tab. And then you have some conversion options with GPX data. All right. The main one I want to point out is that you can actually download directly from your GPS. So in the past, I've always advocated using DNR GPS or DNR Garmin. It used to be called a free software program that you could put on your computer from Minnesota, I think. And with QGIS, you actually don't need to use DNR GPS because it does give you the option of directly downloading your data from your GPS using the QGIS GPS Tools plugin. So, no thanks. So in this case, Garmin serial is my only option. That's fine. That works. I made sure that my port was set to USB because if I had my GPS plugged in, that's where it would be. I indicate which feature type I want to download. I give it a layer name, which is just sort of a temporary name that it actually assigns it for here in the table of contents. But then I give it an actual file name here and go save as. And I can only save it as GPX. That's important to know that when you download it, all you're doing is creating a GPX file that you are actually saving on your computer. When you finish that process, if I was doing this for real, I'd click on OK, and basically this is what I would get. I would just get either waypoints, routes, or tracks, but I would get this GPX file created and put into my project. So that's useful, obviously, because you immediately get it in your map project. But the other useful aspect of this is that you can then immediately transform this GPX data into one or more useful or more other formats that you can use in other ways. You don't have to only have the GPX format. All you have to do to change it to a different format is right-click, and then choose Save As. And right up here at the top, you can see what your options are. You can save it as a CAD file. You can save it as a CSV file if it's point data, as reshape file. If we go down a little bit, you'll see that we can also do keyhole markup language, which again is the Google Maps and Google Earth format. You've got quite a few options here. If you choose as reshape file, that means you are making a projected data format, unlike a KML file, and you'd browse to give it a name and actually tell where you want to save it. If you do that, be careful about this option right here, especially since you're starting with, in this case, GPX data that is not in the Vermont State Plane meters format. So rather than leaving it as layer CRS, if I was saving a shapefile, I would want it to be Vermont State Plane meters NAD 83. And so I would make a point of saying project CRS. And that way, because I set my project CRS to Vermont State Plane, I know that my data would also be saved to that. And then I would just click on OK. So this is, but then I could do the same thing again and save it as a KML file if I wanted to. So then I'd have it saved in a few different formats and have a variety of options for how I could use it. All right, so that's GPS and GPX data. So the other thing I want to add, remember I mentioned back here, not here in New Hampshire, but rather at VCGI's website, our third way of getting data from VCGI is through web services. You can see that we actually have 3 different types of services. 2 of them are really the same, but geocoding services, imagery services, and map services. I'm not going to talk about geocoding services today, but I am going to show you how to add imagery or map services. So why don't I add best of color imagery cached Vermont state plane meters. So the first thing about what we see here is a big long list of data of different options. So you kind of have to scroll through the list. Best of color imagery, first of all, means that this is a mosaic of different imagery sources. At any particular zoom level, we have chosen what we think is the best option for that zoom level. So if you're zoomed out quite a bit, you're probably going to be looking at the NAPE data, which is a 1 meter pixel color leaf-on data collected by a federal agency. As you zoom in more, if there's higher resolution color imagery for that area of the state that works at that zoom level, it will switch to that. So that's what best of means. It's not just one source of imagery. Cached refers to the fact that the imagery has been kind of pre-turned into images appropriate for each zoom level, and what that does is hopefully improve performance in the sense that when you're zoomed out, it's not trying to draw these very, very detailed images. It's drawing an image that's appropriately generalized for that zoom out level. As you zoom in, it's going to show you the more detail and resolution because that's appropriate to that level. So it's basically, we've gone through this process of pre-creating different images for different zoom levels. And I haven't even explained how this all works, have I? Web map services, sorry. The whole idea behind web services is that the images or the maps or imagery are being served to you over the internet. So in the case of imagery, the images for any particular area that you're looking at in your map project are going to be served to you over the internet. As you change your extent or zoom level, a request will be sent back to our server to redraw the image and then send it back to your project. So back to what we're looking at here in our list. Best of color imagery. So the very first first bullet is a link to what's called a layer file, which really just kind of directs your software to that particular service. In this case, this layer file really only works with ArcGIS 10+, so that's not relevant to us. But if you are using ArcGIS 10+, meaning 10.1 or 10.0 or higher, you can just click on this, and if you don't already have ArcGIS open, it'll actually open ArcGIS. If you already have ArcGIS open, it will just plop this service right into your project if you already have a project open. Since what we're using is open source software, and if you happen to be using or have occasion to use ArcGIS version 9.3 or higher, you would use the URL provided here. And all I'm going to do is copy this and paste it. And I'll point out that it is a little bit truncated because it doesn't have the HTTP at the beginning, and that does matter. We're going to have to make sure to put that back in or make sure it's there. All right, so what I want to do is add a WMS layer, again, a web map service layer. So I click on that. I say I want to create a new one. I put my URL right where it says URL, so I'm just pasting. I'm going to scroll back to see whether my HTTP showed up magically, which it did not. So I'm going to put that in. So that's a little bit of an annoying thing that you have to do. Just the nature of our content management system on our website doesn't allow me to put the full URL because it automatically turns it into a link and chops it off at the end so you can't see it. So we're going to call this best of color imagery. Don't need a username or password, so you don't need to worry about that. Just click on OK. Notice that it shows up here. There's actually some other things that I've done. I'm going to say connect. So whatever is listed here, that's what it's going to connect to when you click on connect. This is a good sign. This means it has reached out to our server, found this. Now I'm going to highlight it and name it again because the name doesn't really come through. You can see it's indicating down here there's NAD 83 Vermont for Vermont State Plane. And then I'm going to go ahead and add that. and close this. Oh, it should show up. No, it should, but it doesn't look like it is. Just take a minute. Ah, there we go. I zoomed in a little too close. Now my track went away. Oh, my track went away because it is now hidden. So let me just put it up top here. There we go. All right, so there's my track that I created with my GPS on top of the imagery for Waterbury. And you'll see if we zoom way out. So you can see we still have the imagery when we're zoomed all the way out to statewide, but it draws pretty quickly because it's not trying to draw a whole lot of detail at this scale. Oops. If we zoom back in on Waterbury, you can see it takes it a second to redraw. We start to see more detail. So at this level, we're probably looking at the nape imagery. When we zoom in a little bit more, well, actually, you know what? We don't have any higher resolution color imagery for this area. If we were to go somewhere else, however, actually, did Waterbury not get captured? Oh, wait a minute. Maybe we do. Blanking right now on whether this might actually be the 2012 imagery. I can't quite remember where the border of that is. Okay, so you can see the benefit of this is that we are getting imagery for the entire state without having to download the however many it is, thousands, I think hundreds or thousands of individual image files, and without having to store them on my computer, which I wouldn't be able to do. I'd have to be plugged into an external hard drive to have access to all of these right at the tip of my fingers. So that's a very convenient thing. Obviously, it's only helpful if you have a pretty fast internet connection. But if you do, or if you're only doing this at work where you have that kind of connection, it's very, very convenient. Let me just quickly show you. Let's go back to the web map services on our web page. Let me just comment a little bit on using the map services. So as I said, they're really the same in this case, but we have them separated out so that you can so that the lists are in different places. So the web map services in this case include what we call the base map, which actually has a lot of different data layers in it, which can be very convenient. It's a little bit more convenient to use in ArcGIS, to be honest, than QGIS, but I will show you how you can use it effectively. We also have things like the contours, USGS topo maps, which can be nice to have in this format also. Some hill shade, and that's it. All right, so let's say I wanted to bring the base map into my QGIS project. Once again, I'm going to copy this URL in the second bullet, go back to QGIS, say I want to add a web map service, create a new one. Not sure if that actually overrides that. No, that works. I'll call it base map, but I shouldn't really call it that, and I'll explain why in just a sec. I already have a base map in there, but all right, so here's base map. Let's connect to it. So that works, and you can see there's a lot of different layers in here, and actually some of these, if you open them up, like surface waters. Surface waters really isn't even one layer. That consists of several different. So there's a lot of different layers in here, even within each of these major categories. Some of them are broken down. Roads is another one that's really composed of a bunch of different data layers. So the problem with bringing all of this into QGIS as one service is that for some reason it doesn't really translate well. Many of the layers will come through fine, although it doesn't come out looking perfect. The main thing that I find annoying is that in the table of contents, it's not going to provide it to you in this conveniently readable, open-up-able format, which you really need. You need to be able to see everything separated out like this. If you were to bring it into QGIS as is, it actually just lumps it into one layer, essentially, in your table of contents. You can't see what anything is. It just is there. So what I personally would use this for, if I wanted to take advantage of this, is just as a way to add individual data layers. So if I, for instance, wanted to add the contours or the wetlands, say. See, this has both the NWI and the Vermont. So let's say I just want to add, oops, the Vermont wetlands. I'm going to highlight Vermont Significant Wetlands. I'm going to call it VSWI. And, oh, that's interesting. I didn't bring in the state plane version. My goodness. And go ahead and add that. Let's see what happens. Okay, there it is. Let's see if it shows up. There we go. So you can see that we've got some wetlands here. So the other benefit, and this shows up more with the base map or with like contours or anything like that, is that everything that you get from our web services, web map services, are pre-symbolized. So this has got the nice little wetland symbology. A lot of things are preset. The symbology is preset. The scale at which it will render is preset. So if I zoom out too much, eventually that will disappear, that layer. I have to go out a bit before it'll totally disappear. It still shows. Not sure if the imagery is just taking a while to redraw. I guess it must be. Ah, there we go. So now I think the imagery, or sorry, the wetlands have gone away at this point. So that's how I would recommend using it. If you don't mind having it all come in and kind of be lumped in one layer over here so that you can't really see what the individual layers are, but you just want it to represent some stuff on the map, that's fine. The other issue is you can't turn on and off those layers separately. And like I said, it doesn't render perfectly. There are a couple things that are a little bit odd about the way that it renders, but overall the layers all show up. All right, so we've brought in imagery and some map layers with web map services. The final thing I wanted to mention or show you before, although maybe I should ask, well, this is very quick, is if you wanted to edit or create data. Editing data, if you have, say, the town boundary data. Editing is as simple as clicking on the little editing marker up at the top. It opens up some options. You can open up the attribute table, and you can sort of tell that that little editing tool is either on or off. When editing is on, you can edit, so you do want to be careful. When you go to turn it off, it will ask you whether you want to save the changes, so you can say no. I'm going to discard them. So this would be if I wanted to edit the attribute table. I just would open up the attribute table, make sure my editing toggle is on, and then I can edit away. When I try to close out of editing, it'll ask me whether I really want to do it. I can do spatial editing as well, as you can see. I can also create new data by clicking on the new shapefile layer. So this is creating a vector data layer. I can choose what type of data. I can choose my CRS, give it a name, and obviously set all the characteristics of the data. And then basically start clicking on the map to add features. So I just wanted to quickly point that out. That's kind of the final data acquisition and transformation option that I wanted to cover today. It's just to mention that editing is pretty simple, very straightforward, similar to the basic level of editing in ArcGIS. Okay, I think that that is all I wanted to cover today. And if anyone has questions about any of the things we talked about or something that I haven't talked about, I can do my best. If it's something I can answer. If not, I can get back to you with an answer, or maybe somebody else on the webinar would have the answer actually. So this is your opportunity to ask questions if you have any. And my apologies to Evan. I never managed to answer his question about the access code, so I'm hoping, since he's still on the on the webinar, I'm hoping that means he was able to come up with a solution to that. So as I said, this is your chance to ask questions if you have questions. If nobody has questions, I might have to brainstorm if there's any other interesting stuff to point out. Let's see. Well, yeah, I don't really need to. Well, I guess I can, just for those of you who are new to this, if I were to go ahead and save my project, obviously I give it a name, it becomes a .qgs project saved somewhere. And I'll just point out that when you save, in this case, this project is a combination of data layers that are actually on my computer, services that are off on a server somewhere, and basically it's just saving references to all of those things. And when I open my project again later, it just looks for those things where they were the last time it was saved, and if it finds them, it redraws everything. Okay, here's a question from George, I think. Can you undertake line to polygon conversions? Oh, that's a good question. I feel like someone's asked me that before. Well, let's do this. Let's save the tracks as line data. Oops. Project, what is it? Oh, okay. All right, just so I have some line data. So I'm just saving that tracks data, and there it is. I'll bring it back in. And oh, here we go. I didn't really need to do that. So yes, in the vector menu, geometry tools, lines to polygons, input line, and then I would obviously just going to a completely different place, whatever. Why, yes, I would. Thank you. Okay, so there we go. We just did it. Made the track data into a polygon. All right, so just in case anybody didn't see that, the question was, can I change line data to polygon data? And right here in the vector pull-down menu, geometry tools, lines to polygons. We also obviously have polygons to lines, single part to multi-part, multi-part to single part. Okay, is there a way to use layer files in QGIS? That I actually have no idea. That is something I would suggest. I can certainly do a search on that. I should point out actually that whenever I have a question in QGIS, people often refer to the fact that open source data, like, yeah, that's nice, but oh, there's no support. And I would beg to differ with that, just because there's really such a just because there's such a robust community of people out there, and actually of bloggers and all different kinds of, and discussion forums and such, that pretty much any question you have, it's pretty easy to just do a Google search and find the answer. Matter of fact, earlier today I got frustrated by ArcGIS, and I was trying to just join some data to a shapefile, and it kept crashing on me, and I finally decided to do it in QGIS, and I couldn't remember how to join data in QGIS, and I just looked it up, and it was very easy to find it mentioned on a blog post. So that's a long way of saying I do not know if there's anything similar to layer files. I'm sure you cannot use ArcGIS layer files. You can save styles, but I think that's just for individual layers. So I would suggest doing a Google search on that, and I will try to do a Google search on that question. All right, so Paul Paul is needing to beat this dying horse about state plane feet. The reason, I don't know the reason, Paul, that QGIS does not offer state plane feet as an option. Somebody made that decision. There's lots of little decisions in here, as with ArcGIS, that we might question. I suspect the reason is that meters has been the official, I think this actually changed a few years ago, but it has been the official coordinate system for the state of Vermont. It was the official coordinate system for years. Vermont state plane feet, Vermont state plane meters was the official, and that's why all of our data is in Vermont state plane meters. I do seem to remember a few years ago that Dan Martin made some statement about how either meters or feet, but the reality is I think it's been the standard for years, and that might be why when they decided what to load into their default system, that was what was chosen. So Matt asks another question: how do you upload polygons to a GPS unit without turning them into tracks or routes first, which all have limited memory available on my unit? I do not know. I've never actually uploaded data to a GPS unit, and unfortunately I can't test it right now because I'll cause my whole computer to start flashing at me again. So if anybody else has a suggestion for that, I'm trying to think. I have a feeling it is going to depend on your unit, whether your unit can upload polygon data as opposed to tracks or routes. I mean, it has limited memory on tracks and routes, but it may not have any memory on polygons if it's not really set up to take that type of data. But honestly, I don't know the answer to that because I don't actually use a GPS for very much. I really just use it for data collection, not for going out in the field and using the data that you may have uploaded to it. So, oh my goodness, obviously time for me to stop because my computer is flashing things at me. I will suggest also for anybody who is not already on our VGISL listserv, oh, maybe that's the final thing I'll say if there aren't any more questions. This webinar is being recorded, and assuming we have no technical issues at the end, which I don't think we're going to, it will be posted, or it will be posted really at our YouTube page, but you'll be able to get to that. One of the ways you can get to that is to go to the event archive, which, as you can see, you just click on events and then event archive, and you'll see webinars. And these links, just all of the ones that say recorded webinar, just take you to our YouTube page where everything gets loaded. So here's last week's. But the other thing I wanted to point out is that if you have questions like that I do not know the answer to, there's a really good chance that someone on our listserv does have an answer. So let me point out all the different ways that you can connect with us. And in many ways, the most useful aspect of all of this is that you can ask these sorts of questions of a much wider group of people. So Facebook, nobody really uses it this way yet, but I personally think, or actually that's not true. We've had a few questions. Facebook is also a good place to actually post questions and see if you can come up with answers. We have a Twitter account. We have a LinkedIn account. We have a WordPress blog. The email listserv, which is this little icon here, is almost 700 people. Doesn't get used that much, so it's not annoying to be on, and you're not going to annoy anyone else if you ask questions on it. People really appreciate actually technical questions. So throw your question out on the listserv, or you can always pass it along to me and ask me to do it if you'd rather not join, but I'm happy to send a question out, and then the link to our YouTube channels here as well. But the listserv is an extremely efficient way for people to ask questions of the wider community of people. And generally speaking, I don't think anyone gets annoyed by those questions because they can just ignore them if they don't have an answer or if they don't want to bother to take the time. So I think that's all I have to say if there aren't any more questions. Thank you for coming back for anyone who attended the previous webinar and came back again for this one. I hope it was useful, and you can always send me questions at any time or give me a call, and I'll do my best. And as I said, I'll pass you along to someone with more information or more knowledge if I can't help you with your question. And also feel free, when you sign off, you're actually going to be given a very brief survey. And one of the questions we ask is what sort of topics you'd like to see on future webinars. So I really appreciate it if you have any thoughts about that, filling that out and passing those along to me. And if you have any presenters you think you would like to see, feel free to pass their names along as well. So thank you very much, everybody. I hope you have a great day and great holiday. And keep an eye on our webpage, our listserv, and all these other social media points to see what the new webinars coming up in 2014 are. Actually, you can see right here I do have one posted. That's going to be Jarlath O'Neill Dunn talking about tips on working with raster data in ArcGIS in February. Thank you very much. Have a great holiday.